probably wouldn't consider something like a hot air balloon festival to be anything other than a pretty low-key and straightforward event. But as volunteers at the Arizona Balloon Classic, my wife and I found ourselves in what was turning out to be kind of a shitstorm. We'd opted to make the 100 or so mile drive to Maricopa County a day early, as we were expected at the fairground at 4:45 in the butt-fucking morning. We took advantage of the extra day by enjoying a short hike in Boulder Canyon on the recommendation of a longtime friend of mine, a park ranger known by many across the country as Thor. The next morning, around the time raccoons were going through your trash, we left our Airbnb and arrived at the fairgrounds, only to find that the volunteer coordinator, the person whose job it was to tell us where to go and what to do, had never shown up. Volunteers and balloon teams were eventually directed to a staff meeting and informed that due to high winds that would have sent all the balloons directly into the Palo Verde nuclear power plant, all flights would be delayed or cancelled. We mulled over options of just going home or sticking around to see if we could still be useful somehow, and considering the fact that we were wearing volunteer t-shirts and didn't want to be guilty of the most pathetic case of stolen valor ever, plus the time and money we'd already invested in coming, we settled on the latter option. We wandered aimlessly around the vacant fair a bit, tried on sexy ponchos, and through talking to various personnel, we were able to gather that there'd still potentially be a chance to crew a balloon that evening, at a no-fly presentation if the weather were to calm down as expected. So in lieu of standing around a parking lot for the next 10 hours, we decided to pass the time until then, enjoying what Phoenix had to offer that wasn't traffic or meth. One highlight was stumbling upon the Ass Kickin' Hot Sauce Factory. Their sauce is not particularly great, but we got to feed some donkeys. Eventually we got official word that now that the winds had died down, the evening event known as Desert Glow would indeed be taking place, and volunteers were needed. Following live music, a BMX stunt show, and the only two actual balloon launches of the day, teams were to parade the fairgrounds, firing off their burners before inflating with the help of volunteer crews and a glowing display of all the balloons, along with fireworks. Unfortunately, upon re-arrival, it quickly became apparent that our missing volunteer coordinator this morning was only the tip of the management crisis iceberg, or Kreisberg for short. In our attempts to gain some direction or assignment, we were bounced back and forth through the dense crowds from one supposed authority to another for like 2 hours. Eventually, at long last, we were assigned as assembly crew for what was supposed to be the final balloon team of the parade. Now, by this point, balloon crew volunteers like us were supposed to have been given an orientation and training on, being a balloon crew. But that ship had long sank, and we just had to roll with the punches. Before the team even knew what was happening, the parade had started without us, and we were left rushing to force our way into a dark and disorderly fairground with seizure-inducing lights, thanks cops represent, and packed with an oblivious and largely drunken crowd, something rarely seen in Arizona. Inserting ourselves into the parade quickly became a lost cause, so we jumped tracks to securing a large enough spot and safely assembling our balloon amid the crowing chaos. But let's hold up on that for a spell. We should probably take a moment to introduce ourselves and explain what the hell two pasty New Englanders were doing in the middle of the Arizona desert attempting to assemble a hot air balloon without any training in the dark amongst a herd of drunk people. So I'm Zach, your intrepid host and narrator, and this is my lovely wife Randy. For now, she'll mostly be appearing remotely, as at the time of this recording, she is backpacking the length of the Pacific Crest Trail, which runs from Mexico all the way to Canada. I guess you could call us adventure seekers. We have a shared passion in traveling and often gravitate to unusual, challenging, and exciting places and experiences. From Tennessee cave creatures to the Marfa Lights of Texas, robot orchestras, Confederate dinosaurs, beer-drinking goats, cults, an underground movie prop vault.
A limousine that can fly. Now I have seen everything.
Really? Have you seen a man eat his own head?
No.
So then you haven't seen everything.
Over the years, we'd grown increasingly nauseated, quite literally in my case, with our stifling day-to-day lives in the gray, damp, crowded land of Massachusetts.
Paradise on earth.
Inevitably, we made the decision to sell our homes in Massachusetts, along with almost everything we owned. We built ourselves a pretty elaborate camper van with the money, and then we hit the road permanently so we could continue our exploration of America unbound.
Good morning, sweetie birdie.
I'm out of coffee.
You're out of coffee. Isn't that wonderful? Out of coffee?
Welcome back, dorks. I hope my sizzle reel didn't give you the wrong impression that we're the typical hashtag vanlife types you see doing yoga poses on Instagram. More like vain life, am I right? We're both particularly uncomfortable in front of a camera and, behind a microphone. I haven't even been on social media for the better part of a year, and I gotta say, it makes it way easier to ignore your family. So if we're as humble as we claim to be, then why are we subjecting ourselves to the charming banter of the YouTube comment section of all things? Well, to explain that, we're gonna have to get serious for a moment. You see, Randy and I both come from a background where talking about your feelings with someone, or expressing your own identity, were not really an option, or were outright discouraged and mocked by people close to us. We grew up repressed, having low self-confidence, emotional problems, and living lives that were based around what other people valued and expected of us, rather than what we valued and actually needed. Once we understood that, we soon became aware of how depressingly common this problem is with people all over the country, as well as our culture's unfortunate stigma surrounding mental health. Many suffer alone in silence, afraid to be themselves, embarrassed to seek emotional support when they need it, and unable to prioritize their own happiness, often doomed to slowly compress into infectiously miserable, bitter assholes. We want to combat this stigma, so in addition to being entertaining and providing some unique insight and perspective on travel, culture, and nomadic living, we just as much want to open up a supportive dialogue with our audience about mental health and personal identity. Just so you know where we're coming from, I'm going to tell you a little more about us. Randy is a former CNA turned registered nurse, an advocate for proper elder care, and an avid cross-country hiker, obviously. She's struggled with self-esteem and body image issues for most of her life, and is hoping that with her PCT hike and with this channel, she can share her experiences and challenge her problems with self-image. I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I've curated a somewhat farcical variety of skills and trade experience over the years. I guess the idea was that in the absence of social skills, that no matter where I am and who I'm with, I can be of use to hopefully circumvent being odd. I'm autistic and suffer from PTSD. I'm constantly antsy and socially uncomfortable, and bouts of severe anxiety cause me to become very ill. Remember what I said about Massachusetts? I've been a loner most of my life, and for many years I lived as little more than a shut-in. Despite my best efforts, I'm still somewhat of a recluse and probably always will be. I consider myself very fortunate to have Randy around to help me keep my head above water in regards to having a social life. Both of us love all things nature, are part of the queer community, and contribute time to volunteering and charity work. We're obviously pretty committed to living small so that we can experience big, and be helpful as much as we can wherever we find ourselves. That reminds me of something. Oh yeah! Oh, frabjous day. At the 11th hour, we were matched up with Freedom Flight Incorporated and its husband and wife team Luke and Pam Sesnick, who were under the gun to get their balloon up in time for the Glow Show. Their balloon was the most anticipated of the night. Not only was it the most elaborate, it was the only one that was about bringing awareness to a cause as its theme, so failure was not an option. Unfortunately, the previous night, while unloading the basket, Pam had slipped on the trailer ramp and bent her artificial knee.
I stepped on the white thing and I did the splits. Oh. And then guess which knee I landed on? The artificial one. Sorry, man. I bent it and everything.
A yikes. So she was largely sidelined to directing the confused and untrained volunteers, and Luke acted as the charismatic showman and led much of the assembly process.
Oh, what do you guys say?
With no small amount of bumbling, we dragged the massive wicker basket out of its home without injury, and attached the burners and fuel tanks, all while crowds loomed, fireworks exploded, and other balloons flared up around us. Luke started putting on a flamethrower show for the crowd, and I gotta say, you'd think the fact that heat rises, and that the burners were pointed up, that you wouldn't necessarily feel these things too much. But even at a distance, this was intense, concentrated heat. These things do not fuck around. The balloon came in what I can only describe as a massive 400-plus pound duffel bag, and was packed like a parachute, so it unloads properly without getting tangled or damaging the delicate nylon. Once we managed to disperse the crowd and clear the area of their discarded big gulps and deep-fried nonsense, the basket was laid on its side and the balloon was attached and unraveled. Once Luke let her rip, a new challenge quickly emerged, and that was shooing the crowd away from touching the balloon as it inflated.
Steer clear.
What these doofuses didn't seem to realize is that wind exists, and a sudden gust could roll the whole thing onto you, and it being made of thin nylon, you'd quickly find yourself inside the balloon with a giant flamethrower pointed at you, as well as earning yourself a sizable repair bill to go with your missing eyebrows. But at long last, the Freedom Flyer took shape, and slowly tipped itself upright. However, our job was far from over. We weren't flying, but Luke had to keep the heat up so the whole thing wouldn't slowly deflate onto us, and in the absence of sandbags, it was up to us to act as ballast to keep the rig on the ground. Our team of volunteers, plus a few lucky randos, all hopped on or in the basket to keep it anchored. As you can see, I was sat on the wall of it myself, having my ear hair singed off. The balloon was a hit, and Luke started fielding questions from the many veterans that came by to show their genuine appreciation for what they all considered a grossly underserved cause. Once the show wrapped up, it was time to carefully tip the balloon back down with the help of a long guy line and let it deflate. A large and heavy coil of steel, deflation aid, is pulled around and down the length of the balloon to squeeze out the remaining air and to gather the fabric together tightly for it to be strapped and packed back into its bag. Aside from pulling the heavy-ass napkin ring down the balloon, I was one of 2 lucky ducks on that beast, the rest of the breakdown process was surprisingly quick and easy now that the crowds had left and we could receive clear instruction from Pam. We'd somehow pulled it off and finally got to breathe a sigh of relief after a full day of uncertainty as successful junior balloonists. By this time, everyone was pretty beat mentally and physically, plus the Freedom Flight team were keen on having this day fucking end, so goodbyes were kept unceremoniously brief. The Sesniks gave us cute little souvenir pins for our time, and we promptly set off on the long late-night drive back to where we considered home. Well, we hope you enjoyed our maiden voyage into the contentious waters of YouTube. We've got an assortment of series in mind that I look forward to swearing at my computer attempting to produce. Please like the video to show your support, and subscribe so you can see where we take things from here. If you're interested in the event or balloon team featured in this episode, links will be provided in the description. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, scathing remarks, you know where to stick them. And we'll see you down the road.